I was living in a house with my two roommates at the time. I'd only been there for about a year. I really should have packed up my stuff and left, but I didn't know what else to do, as I could not afford to move out of state all by myself. So far, we never had any unusual experiences until this happened. My roommate would be gone to work all day Sunday through Wednesday, sometimes even through Thursdays. He worked from 3 p.m. till 11 p.m., 7-hour shifts. The other roommate also worked pretty much any shift he could get when he got from his regular job. But on one night, in both particular roommates, they were home sleeping together upstairs in their beds, while it was very stormy outside that night, which, by the way, we're also surrounded by thick, dense woods. So the threat of having a large tree fall on us is very real. I made a habit of nervously eyeing the trees through every window of that rental. Sometimes, my roommates would make fun of me for walking around in a circle, going from room to room, craning my neck. They'd ask me what plan it was if a tree actually fell and I saw it coming. I would just tell them to shut up. But this particular storm that night, as I mentioned, was different. I felt like I couldn't see anything through the windows at night. No street lamps and no property lights of our own. If a tree was going to fall, I wouldn't be able to see it coming. I took some poor man's sleeping medicine, aka bourbon, and tried to go to sleep myself. I think I drifted off a couple of times, but the thunder sounded like it was just outside the walls, so I jumped at every single strike. Then, I became aware of another sound. At first, I thought it was my ears cobbling together, phantom sounds from the chaos of the storm. But the longer I listened, the more certain I was hearing some kind of scraping just outside the wall. Now, my bed is shoved up into a corner, and if there hadn't been a wall in the way, the source of sound would have been poking me in the eye. Well, there wasn't a window there, so I couldn't see for sure what it was. My imagination had all kinds of ideas, mostly a tree leaning as far as it possibly could, before the roots fully let go, and this towering trunk crushed our house. But there was no great impact, just that constant sound. The power of the storm died down just enough for me to hear the scraping even more clearly. I was beginning to get used to it and ignore it when the sound started to move. I had one wide open eye, gazing into the dark as if I could see the sound where it trailed off to. It went over to a part of the wall where my roommates were sleeping. They had windows, I did not. I was curious for my own good. Tree branches don't move like that. I made my way over to their bedroom as quietly as I could, aimed my phone's flashlight out the window before turning it on. It took half a second for what I saw to register. I was on the floor. My brain's first response was, how come I could see the face of this thing all the way up here? My rational sigh took hold of me and told me that the creature was just tall, allowing its face to be seen on the second story. It was almost funny with the way the water had matted its shaggy hair, making it look like a drowned rat. But there was nothing funny about these burning orange eyes and the flaring ape-like nostrils, and what appeared to be tusks protruding from its mouth. It was like some sort of disgusting gorilla-goat hybrid or something. It was simply a demon. It gingerly ran one long claw on one digit across the side of the house, something like dumb curiosity in its eyes. My roommates tell me that I screamed and woke them up, ready to fight a war. They also say that I didn't respond for several minutes. I barely remember the experience. I just remember being more terrified than I ever had been in my entire life. I was with a friend on the road by my house 4 a.m. in the morning. We were coming from a KFC. We drove by some houses not too far away, here in a small forested area. It has been quite recently that I've heard about this thing, but never have taken it as a big deal. But after what we saw, man, now I'm so terrified of what's out there. I don't know whether to believe or not to believe. It has always been something interesting because whenever you see anything about Bigfoot on TV, people call them fake. Then, when they actually see one themselves, they either get killed or disappear for good. Trinidad, Texas, has its share of myths regarding these creatures known as Bigfoots here. I'm not entirely convinced they're just brute beasts. I've come to know of an Indian burial mound that hadn't been properly maintained or preserved. The wild simply overtook it, reclaiming it. Nobody knew what the area was until a number of Native American relics were found. The site also became the source of a number of tales. I've got one of my own to share. As soon as I heard about the place, I had to check it out for myself. I had hoped that I would be able to feel some sort of sacred energy. I didn't feel anything when I showed up. I thought it could have been a fluke. So I went back the very next day. I did feel a slight down feeling, but I thought that was just me. So I visited again. No sooner than I stepped onto whatever invisible boundary there was, my heart began to palpitate. My palms became sweaty. I basically felt like I was on the verge of a panic attack. And just like that, it was over with. I tried to will the feeling to return, but it had passed for good. It was so far out that I came back the day after that. I didn't get that overwhelming feeling again, but I saw a very tall and shaggy shape circling me behind the trees. The fur was that off-white color of a polar bear fur, but dirtier. It was to match every Bigfoot story I've ever heard, minus the color of fur. The implications of a connection between the monster and where I was standing was far more terrifying than the beast itself. It didn't look at me like it was hungry. It looked at me like it was offended, as if trying to get through to me. I wasn't welcome. I didn't tempt fate. I did not come back after that. A few years ago, when I was about 17 or 18, a couple of friends and I were on our way to the beach for some fun and relaxation. We decided to take a different path to the beach through some deep, dense woods. We thought nothing of it, began walking down the path. As we continued to walk, my friends and I began hearing some very peculiar sounds in the distance. These were definitely not any sounds one would normally hear from animals. We didn't know what it was, but these were very scary sounds. The kind of sound that leaves you thinking twice about continuing onward down a certain path or trail through dark woods at nighttime. My friends and I cracked jokes at first, trying to make light of what we heard, as none of us knew for sure what made those terrifying noises. But eventually, our fear overtook our sense of humor, and we ultimately decided to turn back instead of proceeding on our way towards the beach. That's when the strangeness began to ramp up. The birds overhead were very active, but perfectly silent. Squirrels, chipmunks, and even raccoons sprinted around us as if they were evacuating the area. Even the crickets seemed to go quiet. The bizarre noises drew nearer, and I tried to pinpoint which direction they were coming from. It slowly dawned on me that the sounds were surrounding us. The sources had split up and closed around us. My friends must have realized the same thing. They became more agitated and were looking around like panicked animals. The police to this day doubt my story. I don't blame them. But a lack of sheer evidence seems to be the thin thread keeping me out of prison. Plus, the fact that one of the other people with us that day is now in a mental health facility. The sounds bayed and roared all around us until our nerves couldn't be any closer to the surface. A gigantic furry shape erupted from the concealing woods. You've seen the way gorillas run, right? Well, imagine a gorilla that walks and runs like a human being. A gorilla that's as tall as the surrounding trees. It didn't roar. It didn't really make any displays of aggression. It just acted swiftly. It ran toward us. We flinched, and it passed. And the one of us was gone. One of the girls. The tenor of the sounds changed to something like joy. Not that I'm an expert. Each time I look back on this incident, I strain to remember any sound of our friend that was snatched up, but I recall nothing. Surely she struggled or resisted just a little. Maybe she was so terrified that she fainted when she saw it coming at her. But it was on us so quickly. Investigators have found no blood, clothing, hair, or anything. It's as if she was never with us to begin. That was a possibility they considered. It's something that I try not to think about, as much as it resurfaces in my nightmares and when cryptid hunters want to chat with me. It was the summer of 2008. I was at my friend's house. We were having a campfire. We had been partying earlier in the day, but nobody had passed out yet from drinking too much alcohol. We were still up late, talking about our experiences with ghosts, aliens, Bigfoots, and other odd entities. Out of the blue, one of my friends mentioned he'd like to talk about his own encounter with a Bigfoot. Apparently, early in the year, around January or so, he and his girlfriend left out of town for a weekend camping trip. They thought it would be fun to take her pet dog along with them on their wonderful adventure. They arrived at their destination that night after dark, so they set up their tent, pitched camp, went to bed. They woke up to the sound of a dog in distress. They had both gotten their heads out of the tent at the same time. His girlfriend passed out. He could not help but stare in horror at this monstrous ape-like creature that held the dog up in the air by one leg. Like a curious dumb child, it pulled the dog's legs off, and the sound of wet tearing muscle was as awful as the screams that the dog let out. It was clear that he was not going to be able to save this dog, so he hunkered down in the tent and waited. When the thing was gone, there was only blood. He didn't know if this creature ate this dog or what, but he stared at that blood for a long time, thinking that blood could have been him had he slept outside. I don't know if he's full of crap, but he seemed pretty shaken up telling the story, like it really bothered him. He's not the type of person to make something up like this. Maybe there is more truth to his story than I realize. If so, that's incredibly disturbing, and I wish to stay far away from the woods he camped in.